A woman stood frozen in the grand lobby of Charleston's newest opera house. Her face had turned ghostly white, drained of all color as hundreds of eyes fixed upon her. She had just discovered the true identity of the black man she had ruthlessly insulted moments ago. The man she had called worthless. The man whose family she had tried to throw out. And now, her entire world was about to crumble. What happened on that fateful afternoon? Let us turn back time and witness every devastating moment. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below and let me connect with you. If you enjoy stories about justice, karma, and standing up against hatred, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Now, let us begin. Raymond Clark was not the kind of man who demanded attention when he walked into a room. At 42 years old, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any designer label ever could. Standing at 6 feet 1 inch tall, his frame was solid and athletic, built from years of early morning runs and weekend basketball games with his son. His skin was the color of rich ebony, smooth and distinguished, complementing his neatly cropped hair that showed just the slightest hints of gray at the temples. His eyes were warm brown, the kind that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, but could turn sharp and penetrating when the situation demanded. On this particular Saturday afternoon in late October, Raymond wore his usual weekend attire, a simple navy blue polo shirt, pressed khaki pants, and clean white sneakers. No Rolex adorned his wrist. No diamond cufflinks caught the light. No designer logos screamed for recognition. To anyone passing by, he looked like a regular middle-class father taking his family out for a weekend activity. And that was exactly how Raymond wanted it. The philosophy behind his modest appearance was deeply intentional and rooted in his own upbringing. Raymond had grown up in a small apartment in Detroit, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a hospital janitor to keep food on the table. He remembered the Christmas mornings with one small gift under a plastic tree, the hand-me-down clothes from neighbors, the free lunch tickets at school that marked him as different from the other kids. When Raymond had built Clark Technologies from a garage startup into a $12 billion enterprise, he made a solemn promise to himself. His children would never be spoiled by wealth. They would learn the value of hard work, humility, and treating every person with respect regardless of their station in life. The money was a tool, not an identity. And so Raymond Clark, one of the wealthiest men in America, dressed like a regular dad and taught his children that their worth came from their character, not their bank account. Beside Raymond walked his wife Denise, and the sight of her never failed to make his heart skip. At 39, Denise Clark radiated a natural beauty that needed no enhancement. Her skin was the color of warm caramel, glowing with health and vitality. Her hair fell in natural curls, today pulled back into a practical ponytail that bounced slightly as she walked. She wore a simple floral print dress in shades of yellow and white, appropriate for the warm Charleston afternoon. Denise was a pediatrician at the local children's hospital, known for her gentle bedside manner and her ability to calm even the most frightened young patients. She had met Raymond during their college years at Howard University, long before the money, long before the fame. She had fallen in love with the ambitious young computer science student who stayed up late writing code and dreaming of changing the world. The billions that came later were nice, but Denise would have loved Raymond just the same if they were still living in that tiny apartment where they had spent their first years of marriage. Walking slightly ahead of her parents was Zoe Clark, the eldest child at 16. Zoe had inherited her mother's caramel complexion and her father's sharp, analytical mind. Round glasses framed her thoughtful eyes, giving her the appearance of a young scholar, which was entirely accurate. Zoe devoured books the way other teenagers consumed social media, often finishing 3 or 4 novels a week. She was currently at the top of her class at the private academy she attended on a merit scholarship, a detail Raymond insisted upon even though he could have easily paid full tuition. Today, Zoe wore a modest blue cardigan over a white blouse, her natural hair pulled back in 2 neat puffs. She had been quiet during the drive to the theater, her teenage intuition already sensing that their family might face the familiar uncomfortable stares that seemed to follow them whenever they ventured into predominantly white spaces. Malcolm Clark, at 12 years old, was the family's bundle of energy. Taller than most boys his age, he moved with the natural athleticism of someone born to play sports. Basketball was his passion, and he spent hours each day practicing his jump shot and perfecting his crossover dribble. He had his father's ebony complexion and his mother's warm smile, a combination that made him instantly likable. Today he wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, bouncing slightly on his feet as they walked, unable to contain his restless energy even during a visit to an opera house. Malcolm had agreed to come only because his father had promised they could shoot hoops together afterward, but secretly, he was curious to see what all the fuss about ballet was about. And then there was Lily, the baby of the family at 7 years old. Lily was the reason they were all here today. With her father's dark skin and her mother's curly hair, now styled in adorable pigtails with yellow ribbons that matched her sundress, Lily was a chatterbox who found wonder in everything. She asked approximately 400 questions a day, according to her mother's exhausted count, and she had recently become absolutely obsessed with ballet. She had watched the Nutcracker on television 6 times in the past month and had declared that she wanted to be a ballerina when she grew up. When Raymond had learned that the newly constructed Grand Palmetto Theater was hosting a special performance of Swan Lake for its grand opening, and that it happened to fall on Lily's birthday weekend, he knew exactly what he had to do. The fact that Raymond had anonymously donated $5 million to fund the theater's construction was a detail he had kept even from his own family. The Grand Palmetto Theater rose before them like a monument to classical beauty and southern elegance. Its facade was constructed of pristine white marble that gleamed in the October sunlight, supported by towering Corinthian columns that reached toward the cloudless Carolina sky. The architecture was deliberately European, designed to evoke the great opera houses of Vienna and Paris, yet it carried a distinctly southern charm in its sprawling verandas and carefully manicured gardens. Crystal chandeliers visible through the enormous front windows promised opulence within, and the red carpet stretching from the street to the entrance added a touch of Hollywood glamour to the proceedings. This was opening night, a landmark cultural event for Charleston, and the city's elite had turned out in force. Luxury vehicles lined the surrounding streets. Men in tailored suits and women in designer gowns paraded toward the entrance, their jewelry catching the light with every step. Against this backdrop of extreme wealth and privilege, the Clark family in their simple, modest attire stood out like a splash of reality in a sea of pretense. Raymond noticed the stares immediately. He had become an expert at reading rooms over the years, at sensing the subtle shift in atmosphere when his black family entered a predominantly white space. The sidelong glances. The whispered comments hidden behind manicured hands. The way some people seemed to pull their belongings slightly closer, as if his presence somehow threatened their possessions. He had experienced this his entire life, and the billions in his bank account had done nothing to eliminate it. In fact, in some ways, the racism had become more insidious, more carefully coded, as people struggled to reconcile their prejudices with his success. Today, Raymond noticed several couples doing double takes as his family approached the VIP entrance. He saw the question in their eyes, what are they doing here? He felt Denise's hand tighten around his, her silent acknowledgement that she had noticed it too. But Raymond simply smiled, squeezed his wife's hand reassuringly, and kept walking. Today was about Lily. Today was about giving his daughter a magical birthday memory. Nothing and no one was going to take that away from her. Patricia Harrington considered herself the undisputed queen of Charleston high society, and she carried herself with the unearned confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire privileged life. At 55 years old, Patricia was a study in manufactured perfection. Her hair was platinum blonde, an expensive dye job that required bi-weekly salon visits, styled today in an elaborate updo that had taken her personal hairdresser nearly 2 hours to complete. Her makeup was heavy but expertly applied, contouring her aging features into a mask of eternal youth that fooled no one up close. She wore a crimson-red Chanel dress that had cost more than most families' monthly mortgages, paired with a strand of South Sea pearls around her neck that she claimed had belonged to European royalty. Her Hermès Birkin bag, in a matching shade of red, dangled from her wrist like a badge of status. Everything about Patricia screamed wealth and importance, though the truth was somewhat less impressive than her presentation suggested. Patricia's husband, Harold Harrington, owned a regional real estate development company that had made the family comfortable but certainly not extraordinarily wealthy. Their fortune, such as it was, came primarily from old family money that had been carefully preserved rather than grown over generations. But Patricia had transformed their upper-middle-class reality into a fiction of extreme wealth through careful social climbing, strategic name-dropping, and the relentless cultivation of her image as Charleston's premier socialite. She served on the boards of several local charities, not out of genuine philanthropy, but because it provided opportunities to see and be seen. She hosted elaborate garden parties at their historic home, carefully curating the guest list to include only those who could enhance her social standing. And she had appointed herself the unofficial gatekeeper of Charleston's cultural elite, deciding who was worthy of acceptance and who was not. Flanking Patricia like loyal lieutenants were her two closest friends, Victoria Ashworth and Meredith Beaumont. Victoria was a thin, angular woman with sharp features and sharper opinions, known for her cutting remarks delivered with a sweet southern smile. Meredith was softer in appearance but equally vicious in her social judgments, the kind of woman who would compliment your dress while mentally cataloging every flaw. Together, the three women formed what some Charleston residents privately called the Terrible Trio, though no one dared say it to their faces. They stood in the VIP line, champagne flutes already in hand despite the early hour, surveying the crowd with the proprietary air of homeowners inspecting their estate. Patricia was in the middle of a detailed criticism of another woman's choice of handbag when she happened to glance toward the back of the VIP line. Her words died in her throat. There, standing among the Charleston elite, was a black family. Not just any black family, but a black family in casual clothes, looking for all the world like they had wandered in from a neighborhood cookout rather than a high-society cultural event. Patricia's perfectly painted lips pressed together in a thin line of disapproval. She studied them with unconcealed distaste. The father in his polo shirt and khakis like some kind of weekend golfer. The mother in her simple cotton dress that Patricia could tell came from no designer worth knowing. The teenagers looking bored and uncomfortable. And the little girl in the yellow sundress, bouncing excitedly on her feet. They did not belong here. That much was immediately obvious to Patricia. This was a space for refined people, cultured people, people of a certain caliber. And these people, whoever they were, clearly did not meet the standard. "Would you look at that?" Patricia said, her voice dripping with false astonishment. She tilted her head toward the Clark family, ensuring Victoria and Meredith followed her gaze. "I think someone made a wrong turn." Victoria squinted in the direction Patricia indicated, her thin eyebrows rising toward her hairline. "Surely they must be lost. This is the VIP entrance." Meredith let out a little laugh, covering her mouth as if she were trying to be discreet, though her voice carried deliberately. Perhaps they thought this was the entrance for the help. Should someone point them toward the service door? The three women laughed together, that particular kind of cruel laughter that was designed to be overheard, designed to wound. They made no effort to lower their voices, no attempt to hide their contempt. The Clark family could not help but notice. Zoe, with her keen teenage awareness of social dynamics, spotted the three women immediately. She saw the way they stared, the way they laughed, the way they made no effort to hide their disdain. She felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same knot that appeared whenever she was reminded that in America, her black skin marked her as different, as less than, as unwelcome. She reached for her mother's hand and squeezed it tightly, seeking comfort without words. Denise understood immediately. She had been navigating these waters her entire life, just like Raymond had, just like generations of black Americans before them. She squeezed Zoe's hand back, a silent message passing between mother and daughter. "I see it too. We will get through this together." Malcolm noticed too, though his reaction was different. The 12-year-old felt his jaw tighten, felt the anger beginning to simmer in his chest. He was old enough now to understand exactly what those looks meant, what that laughter implied. He wanted to say something, wanted to march over to those women and demand to know what they found so amusing. But he caught his father's eye and saw Raymond give him an almost imperceptible shake of the head. "Not now. Not here. Not like this." Malcolm swallowed his anger like bitter medicine, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Only Lily remained blissfully unaware of the undercurrents swirling around her family. She was too busy craning her neck to see the beautiful chandeliers through the theater windows, too excited about the ballet she was about to see, too young to have fully learned the harsh lessons of racism that her siblings had already internalized. She tugged on her father's hand impatiently. "Daddy, when can we go inside? I want to see the dancers. Are they going to wear pretty costumes? Will there be a real swan?" Raymond smiled down at his youngest daughter, momentarily pushing aside the weight of the hostile stares. "Very soon, sweetheart. The dancers will wear beautiful costumes, I promise. And yes, there will be swans. Lots of them." Lily beamed up at him, and for that moment, nothing else mattered. But the moment would not last. The line moved forward, and the Clark family approached the entrance where a young staff member stood checking tickets. The young man, barely out of college, examined Raymond's tickets with professional efficiency and then glanced up with a genuine smile. "Excellent, sir. You have the Clark family section, front row center. Please follow me, and I will escort you to your seats." The staff member gestured toward the ornate doors that led to the theater's most prestigious seating area. But before the Clark family could take a single step, Patricia Harrington materialized in front of them like a demon summoned by social injustice. "Wait just a moment," Patricia commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She positioned herself between the Clark family and the entrance, her Birkin bag clutched against her chest like a shield. Her eyes swept over Raymond and his family with undisguised contempt, lingering on their casual clothing with a sneer that twisted her cosmetically enhanced features. "There seems to be some kind of mistake here." The young staff member blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I just checked their tickets. Everything is in order." Patricia ignored him completely, her attention fixed on Raymond like a snake preparing to strike. "I don't know how you obtained those tickets," she said, her voice loud enough to attract the attention of everyone in the immediate vicinity. "Perhaps someone gave them to you. Perhaps you found them somewhere. But I assure you, those seats are reserved for people who actually belong here." The lobby had grown quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as heads turned toward the confrontation. Raymond stood perfectly still, his expression carefully neutral despite the fury building behind his calm exterior. Denise moved slightly closer to her children, her maternal instincts sensing danger. Zoe had gone rigid, her eyes locked on Patricia with a mixture of fear and anger. Malcolm's fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had begun to ache. And Lily, finally sensing that something was very wrong, pressed herself against her father's leg, her earlier excitement evaporating like morning dew. Patricia was not finished. Emboldened by her audience, she continued her assault, each word designed to humiliate and wound. "Look at how you're dressed," she said, gesturing dismissively at Raymond's polo shirt. "This is the Grand Palmetto Theater, not some basketball court. This is a cultural institution, a place of refinement and sophistication. Surely you can understand why there might be some confusion about your presence here." Victoria stepped up beside her friend, adding her voice to the attack. Perhaps they thought this was a different kind of event. Something more urban. The word dripped with coded meaning that everyone present understood. Meredith contributed her own venom with a tinkling laugh. Or maybe they were hoping to find a hip-hop concert. "I hear those can be quite exciting." The staff member shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between his duty to customers and his reluctance to challenge women who appeared to be important society figures. He looked at Raymond with an expression that was half apologetic and half pleading, silently begging him to defuse the situation somehow. But Raymond stood his ground, his voice steady when he finally spoke. "Our tickets are valid. We have every right to sit in those seats. Now, if you'll excuse us." He attempted to step around Patricia, but she moved to block him, her expensive heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "I will not excuse you," Patricia declared, her voice rising to a pitch that carried across the entire lobby. "I have been a patron of the arts in this city for 30 years. I know everyone who matters in Charleston. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that you do not belong in the front row of this theater. Perhaps there are some seats in the back that might be more appropriate for your circumstances. She paused, her eyes traveling deliberately over the Clark family once more. Although frankly, I'm not sure this is the right venue for you at all. Have you considered that there might be other places more suited to your kind? The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. Your kind. Two words that carried the weight of centuries of oppression, discrimination, and dehumanization. Two words that reduced the Clark family to nothing more than their skin color, erasing their humanity, their accomplishments, their inherent worth as human beings. Raymond felt the words hit him like a physical blow, but he had endured such blows before. What hurt far more was watching the impact on his children. Zoe's eyes had filled with tears that she was desperately trying to blink away. Malcolm's entire body was trembling with suppressed rage. And Lily, his baby girl, his birthday girl, was looking up at him with confusion and hurt in her eyes, trying to understand why this strange woman hated her family so much. A ripple of discomfort passed through the gathered crowd. Some people had the decency to look ashamed, averting their eyes from the ugly scene unfolding before them. Others watched with morbid fascination, as if this were entertainment rather than humiliation. A few whispered to each other, but no one, not a single person, stepped forward to intervene. The silence of the bystanders was its own form of violence, a tacit endorsement of Patricia's behavior through their refusal to challenge it. Raymond absorbed it all, filing away every face that turned away, every person who chose comfort over conscience. He would remember them all. Denise could feel her professional composure beginning to crack. As a doctor, she was trained to remain calm in crisis situations, to keep her emotions in check while chaos swirled around her. But this was not a medical emergency. This was her family being attacked, her children being traumatized, her dignity being stripped away in public for the crime of having dark skin. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. We have done nothing wrong. We have valid tickets. We have every right to be here. Please let us through. Patricia's response was a dismissive wave of her hand. Rights are earned, my dear. They are not simply handed out to anyone who wanders in off the street. The commotion had attracted the attention of the theater's management. Bernard Whitmore, the operations manager, hurried across the marble lobby with an expression of professional concern etched across his features. At 50 years old, Bernard had spent his entire career navigating the delicate waters of high society events, learning when to assert authority and when to defer to those with power. His silver hair was impeccably styled, his black suit perfectly pressed, and his demeanor precisely calibrated to project competence and discretion. But as he approached the confrontation near the VIP entrance, Bernard felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. He recognized Patricia Harrington immediately. Everyone in Charleston's cultural circles knew Patricia. More importantly, everyone knew that crossing Patricia meant professional suicide. Good afternoon, Mrs. Harrington, Bernard said smoothly, positioning himself to address her first, a subtle signal of where his priorities lay. Is there some issue I can help resolve? Patricia's face shifted into an expression of relieved superiority, as if the cavalry had finally arrived. Bernard, thank goodness you're here. There seems to be some confusion about seating arrangements. These people claim to have tickets for the front row VIP section, but clearly there's been some kind of error. She gestured toward the Clark family with a flick of her manicured fingers, as if they were an unpleasant stain that needed removing. Bernard turned to look at Raymond and his family, and his expression betrayed a moment of hesitation. He took in their casual clothes, their lack of visible jewelry, their unremarkable appearance. They certainly did not look like the typical patrons of the VIP section. And Patricia Harrington was a known quantity, a woman of influence whose displeasure could make his life very difficult. Sir, Bernard said, addressing Raymond with careful politeness that somehow still managed to feel condescending, may I see your tickets? Raymond produced the tickets without a word, his face a mask of calm that revealed nothing of the storm brewing beneath. Bernard examined them closely, his brow furrowing as he realized they were indeed valid. Not just valid, but premium. Front row center in the section that bore the name Clark Family Section. He glanced up at Raymond with new curiosity, wondering how this simply dressed black man had come to possess such expensive tickets. These appear to be legitimate, Bernard acknowledged, though his tone suggested he found this fact somewhat inconvenient. However, given the, sensitivity of the situation, perhaps I could offer you alternative seating? We have some lovely spots in the mezzanine level that offer an excellent view. I could arrange a complimentary upgrade of refreshments to compensate for any inconvenience. The offer was insulting in its transparent attempt to placate Patricia while appearing reasonable. Raymond understood immediately what was happening. Bernard was not trying to resolve the conflict fairly. He was trying to make the problem disappear by convincing Raymond to quietly accept a lesser position, to voluntarily remove himself from the space Patricia had decided he did not deserve to occupy. It was a technique as old as racism itself, the gentle pressure to step aside, to know your place, to avoid making a scene. And Raymond had been stepping aside his entire life. He had stepped aside when teachers assumed he was not college material. He had stepped aside when investors questioned whether a black man could run a tech company. He had stepped aside when country clubs politely informed him that memberships were currently full. But today, on his daughter's birthday, in a theater he had helped build with his own money, Raymond Clark was done stepping aside. "Our seats are in the front row," Raymond said, his voice quiet but firm. "That is where we will be sitting." Bernard's professional smile flickered with discomfort. He glanced at Patricia, who was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes and crossed arms, clearly expecting him to handle this situation to her satisfaction. Then he looked back at Raymond, and something in the black man's steady gaze made him uneasy in a way he could not quite explain. There was power there, Bernard realized. Not the borrowed power of expensive clothes or flashy accessories, but something more fundamental. Something that made Bernard want to apologize even though he did not fully understand why. But Patricia's presence loomed larger in his calculations, and Bernard made his choice. "I understand, sir, but I really must ask you to consider the alternative. It would help maintain the peaceful atmosphere of our opening night celebration. Surely you can understand the importance of avoiding any unpleasantness." The word unpleasantness landed like a slap. As if the Clark family were the source of unpleasantness rather than the victims of it. As if their mere presence was a disruption that needed to be managed. Denise stepped forward, her doctor's composure finally breaking. Unpleasantness? The only unpleasantness here is being subjected to blatant discrimination while everyone stands around pretending it is not happening. Now I want to pause here and ask you something important. If you were in Raymond's position right now, what would you do? Would you take the alternative seating to avoid further conflict, or would you stand your ground on principle? Comment number 1 if you believe he should stay and fight for what is rightfully his. Comment number 2 if you think he should protect his family from further trauma by accepting the other seats. I genuinely want to know your thoughts, so drop your answer in the comments below. And while you are down there, make sure you hit that like button if you believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their skin color. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see how this story unfolds, because trust me, the next part will leave you absolutely stunned. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Now, back to our story. In the midst of this tense standoff, something happened that would break Raymond's heart more than any adult insult ever could. Little Lily, confused and frightened by the angry adults around her, tugged on her father's hand and asked the question that silenced the entire lobby. "Daddy," she said in her small, trembling voice, "why does that lady hate us? Did we do something bad?" The innocence of the question was devastating. This 7-year-old child, who should have been thinking only of ballet dancers and birthday cake, was instead trying to understand why her family was being treated like criminals. Her brown eyes searched her father's face for answers, looking for reassurance that her world still made sense. Raymond felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. But Patricia Harrington was beyond shame. Instead of recognizing the cruelty of her actions, instead of feeling any flicker of conscience at causing a child such distress, she doubled down with stunning viciousness. "Someone should teach that child to know her place," Patricia announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Perhaps that is the problem here. These people clearly have not been taught where they belong. The words hit Denise like a physical assault. Every maternal instinct in her body flared to life. She stepped forward, her usual calm completely shattered, her finger pointing directly at Patricia's smug face. "How dare you speak about my daughter that way? How dare you stand there in your designer clothes and your fake pearls and judge us? You know nothing about us. Nothing about what we have achieved, what we have overcome, what we contribute to this world. All you see is the color of our skin, and you have decided that gives you the right to treat us like we are less than human." Bernard attempted to intervene, his voice strained with growing panic. "Ladies, please, let us remain calm." But Patricia was not interested in calm. She was interested in domination. "I see enough," she spat back at Denise. "I see a family that does not understand their place in the social order. I see people who are trying to insert themselves where they clearly do not belong. And I see a theater management that seems to have forgotten who their real patrons are." She turned her glare on Bernard. "I would hate to have to mention this incident to your superiors. I would hate to have to explain how opening night was disrupted by certain individuals who refused to accept appropriate accommodations. The threat was explicit. Do what I want, or I will destroy your career." Bernard wilted under the pressure, his professional obligations crumbling before the force of Patricia's social power. "Perhaps," he said to Raymond, his voice barely above a whisper, "perhaps the security team could help escort you to the alternative seating area. It really would be best for everyone." The knife had been twisted. The message was clear. You are not welcome here. You will never be welcome here. And we will use whatever force is necessary to remind you of that fact. What would Raymond do now? The answer would soon become clear, but first, the situation would get even worse. Two security guards materialized from the crowd, both tall, both white, both wearing the kind of expressionless faces that suggested they had already decided who the troublemakers were in this situation. They positioned themselves on either side of the Clark family, their presence a not-so-subtle threat of escalation. The taller of the two, a man with a thick neck and suspicious eyes, addressed Raymond with curt authority. "Sir, we have been asked to escort you to alternative seating. Please come with us quietly." The implication was clear. Come quietly, or we will make you come. Publicly. Forcefully. In front of your children. Raymond looked at the security guards, at Bernard's uncomfortable face, at Patricia's triumphant smile. He looked at his wife, trembling with rage and humiliation. He looked at Zoe, tears streaming silently down her cheeks despite her efforts to contain them. He looked at Malcolm, who was staring at the security guards with a mixture of fear and defiance that made him seem both older and younger than his 12 years. And he looked at Lily, who had buried her face in his leg and was crying softly, her little body shaking with sobs. This was the moment that crystallized everything Raymond had been fighting against his entire life. The casual cruelty. The institutional support for that cruelty. The way systems and individuals conspired to remind black people that no matter how successful they became, no matter how much they achieved, they would always be seen as less than. He thought about his mother, working those double shifts, trying to give him a better life. He thought about the sacrifices, the struggles, the indignities she had endured so that he could have opportunities. And he thought about what kind of lesson this moment would teach his children if he simply submitted, if he allowed himself to be pushed aside yet again. The security guard reached for Raymond's arm, his grip firm and presumptuous. "Sir, I am going to have to insist." Raymond did not resist, but he did not comply either. He stood perfectly still, an immovable object rooted to the marble floor. "Remove your hand from me," he said, his voice so calm and controlled that it somehow carried more weight than a shout. "I have committed no crime. I have done nothing wrong. I am a paying customer with valid tickets, and you have no legal right to touch me." The security guard hesitated, thrown off balance by Raymond's composed resistance. He looked to Bernard for guidance, but the operations manager seemed frozen, caught between his fear of Patricia and his growing suspicion that something about this situation was terribly wrong. Patricia stepped into the vacuum of uncertainty, her voice ringing with self-righteous authority. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is why people like them cannot be trusted in civilized spaces. Look at this display. Look at this defiance. They have no respect for authority, no understanding of proper behavior. She turned to address the gathered crowd, playing to her audience like a skilled performer. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that your opening night experience has been marred by this unfortunate incident. Some people simply do not know their place. The crowd remained silent, though now Raymond could see more conflicted expressions among the onlookers. A few people were frowning at Patricia, finally recognizing the ugliness of what they were witnessing. One elderly white woman shook her head in apparent disgust, though whether at Raymond or Patricia was unclear. A young couple near the back were whispering urgently to each other, and the woman was holding up her phone in a way that suggested she might be recording. But still, no one intervened. No one spoke up. The bystander effect held firm, each person assuming someone else would do something, and so no one did anything at all. Malcolm could not contain himself any longer. The 12-year-old stepped forward, his young voice cracking with emotion. "Leave my family alone. We haven't done anything wrong. You're just mad because we're black." Patricia's eyes widened with theatrical offense. "Well, there it is. Playing the race card. How predictable." She looked around at the crowd with a knowing smirk. "They always do this, don't they? Whenever they don't get their way, suddenly everyone is a racist." Raymond placed a firm hand on Malcolm's shoulder, pulling his son back. As much as he appreciated Malcolm's courage, he knew that a young black boy confronting a white woman in this environment could quickly escalate into real danger. "Malcolm, let me handle this." His voice was gentle but brooked no argument. Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, his eyes never leaving Patricia's face. Denise had wrapped her arms around both girls now, Zoe and Lily pressed against her, a protective maternal embrace that could not shield them from the psychological violence being inflicted upon them. She looked at her husband with eyes that contained multitudes, anger, sorrow, frustration, and beneath it all, an exhausted acceptance of a reality they could not escape no matter how successful they became. This was America. This was what it meant to be black in spaces that white people considered their own. The security guard maintained his position, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to back down without explicit permission. Bernard was wringing his hands, his face a portrait of indecision. Patricia stood with her arms crossed, waiting for the inevitable victory, waiting for these intruders to be properly removed so she could enjoy her evening in peace. And then Raymond did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He calmly pulled his phone from his pocket, dialed a number from memory, and lifted it to his ear. "William," he said quietly when the call connected. "I need you at the Grand Palmetto Theater. Now. VIP entrance. You'll understand when you arrive." He listened for a moment, nodded once, and ended the call without further explanation. Then he looked at Patricia with an expression that was almost, but not quite, a smile. "5 minutes," he said softly. "In 5 minutes, everything changes." Patricia scoffed at this cryptic statement, dismissing it as a desperate bluff. But something in Raymond's absolute calm, something in the way he had made that phone call with the confidence of a man summoning an army, made her suddenly uncertain. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her Botoxed features. She quickly suppressed it, reminding herself of who she was and who he obviously was. But the doubt had taken root, and it would soon bloom into full-blown terror. Exactly 5 minutes later, the grand entrance of the Palmetto Theater burst open with an energy that immediately commanded attention. A group of people strode through the doors with the unmistakable confidence of power and importance. They wore suits that cost more than most cars, watches that could finance small businesses, and expressions of people who were accustomed to having doors opened for them wherever they went. At the front of this impressive group walked a man whose face was instantly recognizable to anyone who followed South Carolina politics. Senator William Bradford, 63 years old with distinguished silver hair and the commanding presence of a natural-born leader, surveyed the scene before him with sharp, intelligent eyes. Bernard Whitmore recognized the senator immediately, and his face drained of color so quickly that he appeared momentarily ill. Senator Bradford was one of the most powerful politicians in the state, a man whose endorsement could make careers and whose disapproval could end them. What was he doing here? And why was he scanning the crowd with such obvious purpose? Bernard's question was answered when the senator's eyes landed on Raymond Clark, and his stern expression immediately transformed into a warm smile of recognition. "Ray," Senator Bradford called out, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby as he strode directly toward the Clark family. "I came as quickly as I could. When you called, I was just finishing up a meeting downtown." He extended his hand, and Raymond clasped it firmly, the handshake of two men who clearly knew each other well. Patricia Harrington stood frozen in place, her mouth opening and closing like a fish suddenly finding itself out of water. She watched as one of the most influential men in South Carolina politics embraced the black man she had been trying to throw out of the theater. This was not possible. This made no sense. People like that man did not know people like Senator Bradford. There had to be some mistake. But the senator's next words eliminated any hope of misunderstanding. "Ray, what's going on here? Why did you need me to come?" His tone was concerned, protective even, the tone of a genuine friend rallying to help someone in need. Raymond gestured toward Patricia without looking at her. "We've encountered some difficulty with our seating arrangements. This woman seems to believe that my family and I don't belong in the front row." Senator Bradford followed Raymond's gesture, his eyes settling on Patricia with sudden cold recognition. "Mrs. Harrington, isn't it? Harold's wife?" His voice had lost all warmth. "I wasn't aware that you had been appointed to decide who belongs where in this theater." Patricia sputtered, desperately trying to regain her footing. "Senator Bradford, you don't understand. There was some confusion about the tickets. I was merely trying to ensure that proper protocols were followed." The excuse sounded pathetic even to her own ears. The senator's gaze could have frozen fire. Proper protocols? It looked more like harassment to me. Harassment of a family that has done absolutely nothing wrong. He turned to scan the crowd, his politician's eye noting every face, every reaction. I would think that Charleston would have moved beyond this kind of behavior by now. Apparently, I was optimistic. More people were filtering through the entrance now, drawn by the senator's arrival. Among them was a tall, distinguished black man in an impeccably tailored suit who walked directly to Raymond and shook his hand enthusiastically. "Mr. Clark. I didn't realize you would be here tonight. Are we still on for our meeting about the tech campus investment? My board is very excited about the proposal." The name Mr. Clark, spoken with such obvious respect and deference, rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Patricia heard it. Bernard heard it. Everyone heard it. And everyone began to realize that perhaps Raymond Clark was not the nobody they had assumed him to be. But who was he, exactly? The answer came from yet another arrival, a well-dressed woman in her 40s who approached Raymond with professional urgency. "Mr. Clark, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but my editor just informed me you might be here. I'm with the Charleston Business Journal. We've been trying to schedule an interview about Clark Technologies' expansion plans. Would you have a few minutes after the performance?" Clark Technologies. The name hung in the air like a revelation. Even people who did not follow business news had heard of Clark Technologies. It was one of the largest tech companies in the country, its products used by millions of people every day. And this man, this black man in the polo shirt and khakis, this man who Patricia had accused of not belonging, was the Clark of Clark Technologies. Patricia felt the ground shifting beneath her Chanel heels. She looked at Raymond with new eyes, suddenly seeing past the casual clothes to the quiet power that had been there all along if only she had bothered to look. The confidence in his stance. The intelligence in his eyes. The patience of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone. She had made a terrible, terrible mistake. Bernard was having a similar realization, though his was colored more by professional terror than social embarrassment. He had just attempted to force one of the wealthiest men in America to sit in inferior seats because a local socialite had demanded it. His career flashed before his eyes like a drowning man seeing his life replay. He tried to speak, to apologize, to somehow undo what he had done, but his voice seemed to have abandoned him entirely. Victoria and Meredith had already begun their retreat, putting physical distance between themselves and Patricia as if her toxic behavior might be contagious. They suddenly seemed very interested in examining the architectural details of the far corner of the lobby, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Senator Bradford placed a friendly hand on Raymond's shoulder. "Ray here is one of my oldest friends," he announced to anyone who might still be confused about the situation. "We went to college together. He was the smartest person at Howard, and he's only gotten smarter since. He's also one of the most generous philanthropists in this country, though he does everything he can to hide it." The senator chuckled. "He once told me that he dresses simply because he doesn't want his children to be spoiled by wealth. Can you imagine? A man worth billions worried about keeping his kids grounded. That's the kind of person Raymond Clark is. And that's the kind of person that some people in this room seem to have misjudged rather badly." The words landed with devastating precision. Raymond watched as the implications spread through the crowd, as faces shifted from curiosity to understanding to varying degrees of shame. He took no pleasure in the moment. He had never wanted his wealth to be the reason people treated him with respect. He had wanted, still wanted, to be treated with respect simply because he was a human being, because his family were human beings, because every person deserved that basic dignity. But if his money was what it took to protect his children from people like Patricia Harrington, then he would use it without hesitation. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in the form of Catherine Wells, the executive director of the Grand Palmetto Theater. She emerged from the administrative offices at nearly a run, her elegant gray hair slightly disheveled and her expression one of barely contained panic. Catherine was 60 years old, a woman who had devoted her life to the arts and who understood exactly what the Clark family meant to this institution. When she had received the urgent message about a confrontation involving her primary benefactor, her heart had nearly stopped. Now, bursting into the lobby and seeing Raymond Clark standing there surrounded by security guards and hostile onlookers, she felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. "Mr. Clark," Catherine called out as she hurried toward him, not caring who heard her or what they thought. "Mr. Clark, I just learned what happened. I am so profoundly sorry. This is absolutely unacceptable. Please, please forgive us." She reached Raymond and clasped both his hands in hers, her eyes brimming with genuine distress. "I cannot begin to apologize enough for how you and your family have been treated." Patricia watched this exchange with growing horror, her earlier certainty crumbling into dust. The executive director of the theater was begging this man for forgiveness. The executive director was treating him as if he were royalty. What was happening? Catherine turned to face the crowd, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. "For those of you who do not know, I would like to introduce Raymond Clark, the founder and CEO of Clark Technologies." A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Catherine continued, each word another nail in Patricia's coffin of humiliation. "Mr. Clark is also the anonymous donor who made this theater possible. He donated $5 million to fund the construction of this building. The front row VIP section where you see his name, the Clark family section, was named in his honor, though he insisted we not make a public announcement about his contribution. He wanted the focus to be on the art, not on his generosity." The silence that followed was deafening. $5 million. Anonymous donation. Made this theater possible. The words echoed in the heads of everyone present, reshaping their understanding of the situation. Patricia Harrington had tried to throw out the man who had literally built the building they were standing in. She had accused him of not belonging in the front row of a theater that existed only because of his philanthropy. The irony was so bitter, so complete, that several people in the crowd actually laughed out loud, harsh barks of disbelief at the absurdity of what had unfolded. Catherine was not finished. She pulled a tablet from her assistant's hands and began reading from a list that seemed to grow longer with every item. Mr. Clark has also donated $3 million to the Charleston Children's Hospital, funding the new pediatric intensive care unit. He gave $2 million to the Charleston Public Schools to update technology in underserved communities. His foundation provides full college scholarships to over 500 students from low-income families every year. He funded the renovation of 3 historic black churches damaged in the floods last year. He established a small business loan fund for minority entrepreneurs that has helped launch over 200 new businesses in the past 5 years. She looked up from her tablet, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. This is the man who was just told he does not belong here. Harold Harrington, Patricia's husband, had arrived during Catherine's recitation. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his face the color of old brick, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Harold was a businessman, and he understood immediately the catastrophic implications of what his wife had done. Clark Technologies had significant real estate holdings throughout the Southeast. Harold's company had been angling for contracts with Clark for years, seeing them as potential game changers for his business. And now, his wife had just publicly humiliated the man who could have made those dreams come true. More than humiliated. She had attacked his children. She had told his 7-year-old daughter to know her place. Harold felt the future of his company crumbling before his eyes. Raymond watched all of this unfold with a complex mixture of emotions. He felt vindicated, certainly. He felt relieved that his family would no longer be subjected to the abuse they had endured. But mostly, he felt a deep, abiding sadness. Sad that his money was what had changed people's perception of him. Sad that without the revelation of his wealth, he and his family might still be standing here, surrounded by security guards, being treated like criminals. Sad that in America, a black man's humanity still had to be proven with bank statements. He looked at Patricia Harrington, really looked at her, and he saw not a monster but a sad, empty woman whose entire sense of self-worth was built on tearing others down. It did not excuse what she had done. Nothing could excuse that. But it did make her somehow pitiable. Senator Bradford stepped forward again, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. Raymond Clark is one of the finest men I have ever known. He is proof that character has nothing to do with the color of your skin, and everything to do with the content of your heart. What happened here today was ugly and wrong. But I have hope that it can serve as a lesson. A lesson about assumptions, about prejudice, about the poison of racism that still infects our society. He looked directly at Patricia, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Some people in this room owe Mr. Clark and his family an apology. A real apology, not the kind motivated by the discovery of his wealth, but the kind motivated by a genuine recognition of wrongdoing. I hope, for their sake and for the sake of their souls, that such an apology will be forthcoming. Patricia Harrington found herself propelled forward by some combination of social survival instinct and genuine terror. She approached Raymond with unsteady steps, her earlier confidence completely shattered, her designer armor offering no protection against the weight of her disgrace. Mr. Clark, she began, her voice cracking on his name. I didn't know who you were. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I would never have. She trailed off, unable to complete the lie even as she was attempting to tell it. Raymond stopped her with a raised hand. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made his words cut even deeper. You didn't know who I was. That's true. But Mrs. Harrington, that's exactly the point. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. You didn't know I was wealthy. You didn't know I was connected to powerful people. You didn't know I had donated millions to this theater. All you knew was that I was a black man in casual clothes, and that was enough for you to decide I didn't belong. That was enough for you to try to have me and my family removed. That was enough for you to tell my 7-year-old daughter to know her place. Patricia's face crumpled. For perhaps the first time in decades, she could not find a deflection, an excuse, a way to spin the situation in her favor. The way I was raised. I didn't mean. Raymond cut her off again. What you meant is exactly what you said. You meant every word. The only difference now is that you've discovered my words carry weight because of my bank account. If I were just a regular working-class black man, you would feel completely justified in what you did. You might even be proud of it. The accusation hung in the air, unanswerable because it was true. Meanwhile, the modern age was doing what it does best. Cell phones had been recording the entire incident from multiple angles. Videos were already being uploaded to social media platforms, spreading across the internet with viral speed. Within an hour, the hashtag Patricia Harrington was trending nationally. Within 2 hours, the story had been picked up by major news outlets. By the end of the evening, Patricia Harrington's name would become synonymous with racist entitlement, a cautionary tale shared millions of times across the digital landscape. The consequences came swiftly and without mercy. Harold Harrington received a call from his largest investor, informing him that their business relationship was under review pending the resolution of this unfortunate incident. Translation: they were preparing to pull their funding. The Charleston Historic Preservation Society, of which Patricia was a board member, released a statement distancing themselves from her actions. The Garden Club of Charleston, which she had chaired for 8 years, called an emergency meeting to discuss her removal. The Junior League sent a carefully worded message suggesting that her continued membership might not be in the best interest of the organization. The social empire Patricia had spent 30 years constructing was collapsing in real time, brick by carefully placed brick tumbling down around her. Victoria and Meredith, the loyal friends who had stood by Patricia's side throughout the confrontation, were now actively participating in her destruction. They gave interviews to anyone who would listen, emphasizing their own discomfort with Patricia's behavior, claiming they had tried to stop her, rewriting history in real time to protect themselves. "I always felt she went too far sometimes," Victoria said to a reporter, her thin face arranged in an expression of concern. "But I never imagined she was capable of something like this." The betrayal was complete and utterly predictable. Through it all, Raymond Clark maintained his composure. He did not gloat. He did not issue statements or give interviews or capitalize on the moment. Instead, he gathered his family, accepted Catherine Wells' profuse apologies and assurances that Bernard would face serious consequences, and quietly led them toward their seats in the theater. The seats they had every right to occupy. The seats that bore their family name. As they walked down the aisle to the front row, the assembled audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Not for Raymond's wealth or his power, but for his dignity. For his grace under fire. For his refusal to be diminished by hatred. Raymond paused before sitting down, turning to address his children with words that came from the deepest part of his heart. He knelt down so he was at eye level with Lily, who had finally stopped crying but whose eyes were still red and puffy. "Lily, sweetheart, I need you to understand something. What happened today was not your fault. It was not our fault. That woman was wrong, completely wrong, to treat us the way she did. There are people in this world who will judge you because of the color of your skin. That is their failure, not yours. You are beautiful. You are smart. You are worthy of love and respect. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise." Lily nodded solemnly, her little face more serious than any 7-year-old's face should ever have to be. "But Daddy, why did you need to be rich for people to be nice to us?" The question pierced Raymond's heart because it cut to the core of everything that was broken in society. "That's a great question, baby girl. And the honest answer is that I shouldn't need to be rich. Everyone should be treated with kindness and respect, no matter how much money they have. Today, we're going to watch a beautiful ballet. And tomorrow, we're going to work on making the world a place where every little girl, no matter what she looks like, can go anywhere she wants without being told she doesn't belong." Zoe, the 16-year-old who had witnessed everything with adult comprehension, spoke up. "Dad, why didn't you tell them who you were from the beginning? You could have avoided all of that." Raymond smiled sadly. "Because, Zoe, if I had to tell people who I was to be treated like a human being, then they still would have learned nothing. They would have treated us well because of my money, not because of our humanity. Today, people saw their own prejudice reflected back at them. Some of them will never change. But maybe, just maybe, some of them will think twice before judging someone by their appearance again. That possibility is worth more than avoiding a little discomfort. Malcolm, who had been quiet throughout, finally spoke. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I was so angry. I wanted to fight. But you showed them that you didn't need to fight. You just needed to be patient and let them destroy themselves." Raymond pulled his son into a hug. "Anger is natural, Malcolm. There's nothing wrong with feeling angry when people treat you unjustly. But anger is a fire, and fire can warm you or it can burn you. Learning to use it wisely, that's one of the most important lessons in life." The house lights dimmed, and the grand Palmetto Theater fell into hushed anticipation. The orchestra in the pit began the opening strains of Tchaikovsky's masterpiece, and the heavy velvet curtains parted to reveal a stage transformed into a moonlit lake. Lily sat in her seat, her earlier trauma momentarily forgotten as she watched the dancers take the stage in their ethereal white tutus. Her eyes grew wide with wonder, her mouth forming a perfect O of amazement. This was what Raymond had wanted for her birthday. This moment of pure magic, unspoiled by the ugliness of the adult world. Denise leaned against her husband's shoulder, her hand finding his in the darkness of the theater. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the music. "For how you handled that. For who you are." Raymond squeezed her hand in response, no words necessary between them. They had been partners for nearly 20 years, had weathered storms far worse than today's, and had emerged stronger each time. This would be no different. Their children would process what had happened, would learn from it, would grow from it. And the family would continue forward, as they always had, with love as their foundation and dignity as their guide. As the ballet unfolded, scene after beautiful scene of grace and artistry, Raymond allowed himself to become lost in the music. He thought about his mother, who had never seen him become successful, who had died the year before Clark Technologies went public. He thought about how proud she would have been, not of his money, but of how he had handled himself today. She had always taught him that the measure of a man was not what he had, but how he treated others and how he responded to mistreatment. "Kill them with kindness," she used to say. "And when that doesn't work, kill them with success." Today, Raymond had done both. Before the final act, Catherine Wells took the stage to make a special announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice resonating through the magnificent hall, "tonight is our grand opening, a celebration of culture and community. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to acknowledge some very special guests. The Clark family is here with us tonight, seated in the section that bears their name. Their generosity made this theater possible, and their presence here is an honor. Would you please join me in thanking them?" The spotlight swung to illuminate the front row, catching Raymond, Denise, and their 3 children in its warm glow. The audience rose as one, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Raymond acknowledged the recognition with a humble nod, embarrassed by the attention but understanding its importance. This was not about him. This was about showing his children that good things come to those who persist, that evil does not always triumph, that there are more good people in the world than bad. He looked at Lily, who was waving shyly at the crowd with a smile that had finally returned to her face, and he knew that whatever the future held, this moment would stay with her forever. 6 months later, the Charleston Post ran a front-page story that would become one of its most shared articles of the year. The headline read, "Clark Foundation launches anti-racism education program in local schools." The accompanying photograph showed Raymond Clark surrounded by children of all races, all of them wearing T-shirts that bore the program's name, Lily's Voice. The article detailed how the $10 million initiative would bring diversity education, cultural sensitivity training, and anti-bullying programs to every public school in the Charleston area. But it was the program's origin story that captured readers' hearts. The article included an interview with Lily Clark, now 8 years old, who had become the unexpected face of the initiative. "I want other kids to know that they belong everywhere," Lily said with the earnest conviction of childhood. "It doesn't matter what you look like. Everyone deserves to feel welcome. That's why we called it Lily's Voice, because every kid should have a voice, and every voice should be heard." The interview also included Lily's recounting of the incident at the theater, told in her own simple words, a child's perspective on adult cruelty that was somehow more powerful than any sophisticated analysis. Perhaps the most surprising element of the article, the detail that caused the most discussion and debate, was the small section near the end about Patricia Harrington. In the months following the incident, Patricia had experienced what could only be described as a complete psychological collapse. Her social standing had been obliterated. Her marriage had nearly ended. Her so-called friends had abandoned her with stunning speed. She had spent weeks in therapy, slowly unpacking a lifetime of prejudices that had been passed down through generations of her family like a toxic inheritance. And when she finally emerged from that dark period, she had reached out to Raymond Clark with a letter that was 5 pages long and stained with what appeared to be tears. Raymond had read the letter 3 times before responding. It was not an excuse. Patricia did not try to justify her behavior or minimize what she had done. Instead, she took full responsibility for her actions and acknowledged the deep-seated racism that had motivated them. She described growing up in a household where casual bigotry was as common as breakfast, where certain words were used freely, where certain assumptions were never questioned. She wrote about the shame she felt looking back at her life, at the countless small cruelties she had inflicted on people of color without ever considering them worthy of her conscience. And she asked, not for forgiveness, but for the opportunity to do better. Raymond had granted her that opportunity, though many in his circle thought he was foolish to do so. Patricia Harrington now spent 3 days a week volunteering at a community center in one of Charleston's predominantly black neighborhoods. She had donated half of her jewelry collection to fund after-school programs for underprivileged children. She had become an unexpected advocate for racial justice, using her own story as an example of how prejudice can blind us to our own cruelty. Not everyone believed her transformation was genuine. Some suspected she was simply trying to rehabilitate her reputation. But Raymond had looked into her eyes when they finally met again, and he had seen something real. Something broken that was slowly being repaired. Something like genuine remorse. The article ended with a photograph that had become iconic in Charleston. Lily Clark and Patricia Harrington stood together at the opening ceremony of a new playground that the Clark Foundation had built in an underserved neighborhood. Patricia was kneeling to be at Lily's height, and the two of them were embracing. Lily had chosen to forgive the woman who had hurt her, an act of grace that humbled everyone who witnessed it. She said sorry, Lily explained when asked about the photo. And she's trying to be better. Everyone deserves a chance to be better. Now, as we come to the end of this incredible story, I want to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Was it Raymond's quiet dignity in the face of hatred? Was it Lily's innocent question that exposed the ugliness of racism? Or was it Patricia's unexpected path toward redemption? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single comment, and your thoughts helped shape the stories I tell. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and let me know. Your likes tell me that these messages of hope and justice matter to you. Subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so you never miss another story. We share powerful tales of karma, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit every week, and I would love to have you as part of our community. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Share it with a friend who is facing discrimination. Share it with a family member who might need a reminder that dignity and grace are more powerful than hatred. Share it because stories like this need to be told, and the more people who hear them, the more change we can create in this world. Thank you for watching until the very end. Thank you for caring about these stories and the messages they carry. May you go forward with the dignity of Raymond, the innocence of Lily, and the courage to stand up against injustice wherever you find it. May you always remember that your worth is not determined by your bank account, your clothes, or the opinions of small-minded people. You belong wherever you choose to be. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. This world needs more people who choose love over hate, who choose understanding over judgment, who choose to build bridges instead of walls. Be that person today and every day. I will see you in the next story. This powerful story teaches us several important lessons that we should carry with us every day. First, never judge a person by their appearance. Raymond Clark dressed simply and drove a modest car, yet he was one of the wealthiest men in America. Patricia Harrington made assumptions based solely on skin color and casual clothing, and those assumptions destroyed her entire social standing. Appearances tell us nothing about a person's worth, character, or achievements. Second, true dignity comes from within. Raymond never lost his composure despite the vicious attacks. He did not scream or fight. He simply stood his ground with quiet strength. This inner peace cannot be purchased or inherited. It must be cultivated through years of self-reflection and emotional discipline. Third, racism ultimately harms the racist most of all. Patricia believed she was superior, yet she ended up humiliated before hundreds of people. Her prejudice cost her friendships, reputation, and nearly her marriage. Hatred is a poison that destroys the vessel that carries it. Fourth, children are always watching. Lily learned about both the ugliness of racism and the power of forgiveness through this experience. How we respond to injustice teaches our children how to navigate an imperfect world. Finally, redemption is possible for those willing to do the hard work. Patricia's journey from villain to advocate shows that people can change when they honestly confront their flaws. Now I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of their appearance or background? What did you do in that moment? Drop your story in the comments below because your experience might help someone else find the courage to speak up. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button right now. Your support helps spread these important messages to people who need to hear them. Subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story of justice and redemption. Share this video with your friends and family today. Share it on your social media pages. The more people who see stories like this, the more awareness we create about treating every human being with dignity and respect. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. Your presence here means everything to me. May you always have the strength to stand up for what is right, the wisdom to see beyond appearances, and the grace to forgive those who wrong you. Go out into the world today and treat everyone you meet with kindness, because you never know what battles they are fighting or what greatness they carry within. Take care of yourself and each other. See you in the next story.